Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's eClaims webinar. We ask you to please keep your phone lines muted as we will be using the chat feature to receive your questions today. Please enter your questions throughout the presentation in the chat box located on the right side of your screen. Use the drop-down to send your questions to the panelists. You can also hover over the WebEx tab at the top of your screen and click on Chat. We will answer as many of your questions as we can, but if you have questions that we don't get to today or think of something after the session ends, we will be providing you with resources at the end of the presentation. Today we will be covering 3.1 news and our 3.1 changelog updates. We will also take questions at the end of the webinar. First, we will review eClaims recent news since the October webinar. The updated 3.1 element requirements table, event table, edit matrix, and changelog have been published on the eClaims page on the board's website. These updates are summarized on the changelog under item numbers 244 to 289. These were published on October 29th. On November 3rd, eClaims posted the subsequent report of injury subannual reference document. You can find this on the implementation guide page for R3.1. This document gives the different scenarios for the Shroy SA transactions. Next, we'll review the eClaims topics since the October webinar. eClaims would like to remind everyone that onboarding will continue until January 7th. On January 24th, you will be put into production regardless to whether or not you pass the tests. If you submit through SFTP and you have not successfully passed the SFTP testing by January 24th, we strongly recommend and encourage that you use the eClaims web data entry application to send your 3.1 transactions. This will eliminate the risk of rejected transactions. The board will continue the ongoing monitoring requirements as listed in the implementation guide for 3.1 under section 3.9. A few more reminders to cover. 3.0 flat file submissions can be submitted until January 20th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Web data entry will be available until January 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And eCase will be available until January 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will go live with eClaims EDI 3.1 on Monday, January 24th. The September and October slide decks and recordings are now available on the eClaims presentation page on the board's website. Those recordings include the demonstration of the web data entry application. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mike.
Thank you, Patty. I'm going to go over briefly the Shroy SA scenario reference document that we posted to the website recently. We just ask if there's any specific scenarios or questions that you have, that you email the eclaims31@wcb.my.gov email, since some of those scenarios may require research for us to provide you an answer. This was recently posted on the board website. You can find it under the implementation guide section of the eClaims 3.1 page on our website. We also encourage folks, if you have not already, to review the New York State event table under the periodic tab. You can find all of the periodic requirements for 3.1. Also, just want to note that any extra filing similar to 3.0 today, we have no edits that would reject destroy SA. So if you do have in your programming to send additional Troy SAs, for example, in a medical only scenario, it would still accept. We have no plans to reject any of those extra filings. So I just briefly want to go over the scenarios that you have on the screen there. And again, this document is available on the website, so you can print it out. For the initial summary reports, scenario one, very basic scenario. You'll notice that after 6 months from that data accident or the filing date that Troy SA is due, that again is 180 days to be exact. In scenario two, we introduce the concept of an award order date and carrier to continue payments. Many of you know that as CCP in our terminology. When that happens, the Troy SA due date actually resets. So in this case here, it would be due on August 29 due to the date resetting based on our award order date of March 2nd. Scenario 3 actually has two scenarios within it, 1 and 2. In one of those, we close the case without a CCP, and that case actually closed just 3 months after the initial filing of the Freuler data accident. When that happens, the due date actually resets, so it would only be due on September 1st in that scenario, 180 days from that March 5th date. Again, if you were to file one on, for example, July 1st, it would not reject. We would accept that additional Troy SA if you wanted to submit it anyways. In the second case, we introduce a reopening during the initial closure. If any of you have reviewed the amended regulations, you'll see that we actually have a reopening clause in there as well. So in that, it actually resets the date, and we introduced yet another twist to this one in that we closed it without a CCP within that 6-month period. So you'll actually see in this case that Troy SA wasn't due until January 28th, just because of the fact that we reintroduced that. For the subsequent summary reports, so these are going to be when a case reopens later on, possibly an additional continuing payments direction, or just there's additional Troy SAs due to the continuing payments. So in that first one, very similar to one of the initial scenarios, the case closed with an award and without any CCP. So there was a Troy SA due on October 28th. In the next case, there is a subsequent closure in that scenario, number 2. So you'll notice that we, very similar to the initial cases, had a case that was reopened and then closed by the board again. So in that case, the Troy SA was due on January 28th of 2021. In the next scenario, number 3, we again had a case that we had originally closed, got reopened right away, and then had another decision right away, and it was closed without continuing payments. In that case, again, that 6 months is based on that most recent award. In scenario 4, it stretches out just a little bit further, and we have an initial date. That initial Troy SA would have been due from one of the previous scenarios, but then there's a closure without CCP. So in that case there, that last Troy is due 6 months from the initial closure. One important thing I want to note, you'll see a note at the bottom of each of those pages. It is in a lighter font, so it may be hard to read on the actual screen. But the Troy SA on a reopened case is currently optional for those filings. The only exception to that is if we've directed continuing indemnity payments, very similar to 3.0, those are always going to be due every 6 months if there's continuing indemnity payments. Otherwise, filings on reopened cases will be optional at the initial implementation of 3.1. I did see a couple questions regarding the Troy SA. One of them is just about if the date resets, if a CCP is set or changed. Yes, the way it does work is based on the award order date. So if there does happen to be subsequent hearings and that CCP changed, it could actually reset the due date in that case. And I'm ready for the next slide, Patty. The other topic we wanted to go over this month was the Schroy AC. So acquisition indemnity has ceased. So this is a new Schroy subsequent report of injury in the IA standard for 3.1. It's only filed if the indemnity had ceased prior to your acquisition. This maintenance type code will only apply to third-party administrators who acquire claims from other claim administrators. If you're an insurer who does not typically acquire claims, since that would be atypical in those examples, you would be exempt from filing Schroy ACs. And the measure you can use for whether you're exempt from that is if you do not file Schroy AQs or AUs today, then you're not filing the Schroy acquired payment today, and you would not file the Schroy AC in 3.1. There are no changes in 323 to support the Schroy AC. All of our existing regulations cover this scenario. The other new thing in 3.1 is that we actually return an acquisition status code, DN410, on the acknowledgement file. When you file that Schroy AQ or AU, we will return an acquisition status code if one is due. If you're using web data entry, we will return it on the little yellow acknowledgement screen. So it'll be there after you successfully submit the transaction. That acquisition status code, I'm going to jump down to the last bullet just to go over that one first. That the claim administrator must notify the board that payments are not being made within 16 days of receiving B Schroy due in that acquisition status code on the returned acknowledgement file. So what that means is we're actually looking at the transactions previously filed by that last claim administrator. So to use an example, if the previous claim administrator had filed a Schroy AU and a Schroy IP, and we currently have that payments are continuing, and now you as a new claim administrator come in and file a Schroy AQ, we're actually going to return B Schroy due in that acquisition status code field on the acknowledgement file, letting you know that you're either going to have to file the Schroy AP, acquired payment, if you still have continuing payments or paying, or if you discovered the last claim administrator had actually suspended payments but never actually filed the suspension, that's where this Schroy AC is now helpful. You'll be able to file that, and you'll actually include in there DN423, acquired claim, last known indemnity through date. You'll include that, and we'll know at that point when that previous claim administrator stopped filing. What that will actually save a new claim administrator from is having to sort of falsely file the Schroy AP that they've started payments to then file a suspension and suspend payment. So this would be in lieu of that in the future. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Sue to do the change log updates.
Actually, I think Kim has this one.
You're correct, Sue.
The eClaims Release 3.1 changelog was updated and posted on Friday, October 29, 2021. The implementation date for the changes posted have a date of either Monday, January 24th, 2022, or Friday, April 29th, 2022. And we're going to highlight the changes on the next few slides, but we do strongly encourage you to review the entire changelog, which can be found on the eClaims page of the board's website under our New York Requirement Tables page. The following relaxed edits, changelog items 251, 269, 275, and 285 are ones to be implemented on January 24th, 2022. We'll start off with changelog item 251. Changelog item 251 did relax the Schroy conditional requirement on initial return to work type code and latest return to work type code. We removed part of the requirement which stated, or effective 1/22/2019, required if number of reduced earnings is greater than 0. We removed that requirement as it was determined to be an unnecessary business condition. Changelog item 269 was also relaxed. It's a relaxed population restriction on 202.064E, which is reduced benefit amount code for Schroy 02 by adding our reclassification of benefits. That population restriction now reads, if Schroy CB does not have a reduced benefit amount code of D, N, S, and now the addition of R, reclassification of benefit, and does not include recovery code 880, then number of benefits must not be 0 or 1. Next changelog item we relaxed is changelog item 275 on 0226064A, which is recovery code on a Schroy 02 by also adding the reclassification of benefits. That population restriction now reads that if it is a Schroy CB and does not have reduced benefit amount code of D, N, or R, or S, and does not include recovery code 880, then the number of benefits must not be 0 or 1. So we just added that R reclassification of benefits and relaxed that one again on 226 for recovery codes. Changelog item 283, also modified population restriction 288.059 on number of benefits for the Schroy 02 by adding unless reduced benefit amount code equals R reclassification of benefits or D decrease in benefits. So again, that one is now going to read, if Schroy 02, then all benefit type codes on the last accepted Schroy with benefit segments must be present on the Schroy 02 unless you're giving us reduced benefit amount code of R or D for decrease in indemnity. By relaxing this edit, you are now going to be able to reclassify or a benefit or drop a benefit that you may have reported an error on a Schroy 02 without receiving an error that all benefit type codes on a previously reported Schroy must be present. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, and she's going to review changelog for modified edits.
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Kim said, I will be going over the remainder of the edits that will go into play on Monday, January 24th, 2022, as well as some of the edits that will be going into effect on Friday, April 29th, 2022. So the remaining 4 edits for January are item 264 for DN0064, number of days worked per week. The population restriction 0064-64A is modified by changing the applicable MTC to just Schroy 02. Item 265 for DN0074, claim type code. The population restriction on 0074 64E was modified by changing the applicable MTC to exclude O2s. Change log item 273, DN0204, workweek type code, population restrictions 0204-64A and 64B were modified by changing the applicable MTC to just FROI 02. And change log item 274 also applies to DN0204, workweek type code. The population restriction 0204-64B was modified by adding the word not to the requirement in front of the blank for DN0205 workday schedule code. So it previously read, if DN0204 is F for fixed work week, and then DN0205 workday scheduled code cannot be all ends. If DN0204 workweek type code is F and workday scheduled is blank and is not all ends, then workday scheduled must be included in the change variable segment. It will now read, if DN0204 is F, then workday scheduled code cannot be all ends. If DN0204 is F and workday scheduled is not blank and is N, then 0205 workday scheduled code must be included in the change variable segment. We have 24 modified edits to be implemented on Friday, April 29th, 2022. Many of these changes were made to support DN0442 net to zero. In addition to the net to zero changes, we have item 248, which is for DN0064, number of days worked per week, which modified the FROI and SHROI 02 reportable change codes for add and update from I to K. Items 261 and 263 are both for DN0005 jurisdiction claim number. Item 261 is a modification to remove, except FROI 02, from the report or MTC column of the population restriction 0005-117. And item 263 is a clerical edit explicitly listed as a requirement for DN0005 as population restriction 0005-117B. Item 267 is a modification on the population restriction for DN0154, employee ID assigned by jurisdiction. Item 268 for DN0192, benefit payment issue date. The date must not be greater than the date the board received the transmission plus 4 days. Now applies to the SHROI CA and CB as well. Items 270, 271, and 272 modify DN0202, reduced benefit amount code. Items 276 and 277 cover DN0226, recovery code modification. Items 278 and 279 modify DN0283, number of payments. DN281 and 282 modify DN0288, number of benefits. And that covers all the changes on this slide. So in addition to the changes I just read to you for April 29th, 2022, we also have 280, 284, 285, 286, 287, and 288, which are all modifying changes and modifications for DN0442 net to zero. And that is all I have, Patty.
Before we conclude today's presentation, I want to make sure you're aware of the methods to stay informed on eClaims news and upcoming engagement opportunities. You can visit the eClaims website at wcb.ny.gov to stay up to date on eClaims news. You can also sign up to receive news straight to your inbox. This is how we will be communicating future engagement opportunities throughout the course of the BIS project. Visit the eClaims site and select WCB notifications within the eClaims overview section. Questions, comments, and feedback on the eClaims EDI R3.1 upgrade can be emailed to eclaims31@wcb.ny.gov. Questions regarding existing eClaims EDI R3.0 should continue to be sent to eclaims@wcb.ny.gov. You can also follow the board on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. A recording of this webinar is going to be placed on our YouTube and eClaims website, as well as FAQs spawned from the questions being asked during this webinar series. So keep an eye out for these resources, as well as a follow-up email. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time today.